your house isn't worth as much money as you think, potentially. And we're going to talk about that here today. And usually when you talk to people about how much their house is worth and you have that sit down conversation, there's going to be a lot of emotions involved. And that's totally okay. Which is why that's my first topic on here is emotions. It's where you spent a long time in your house and maybe seeing kids grow up, the grandchildren all around for holidays, and you just build a really emotional attachment to this property, and you just can't there's no value on emotion and memories, and that's totally okay. And I'll have that conversation, talking with someone, like, just to be fully transparent with you, this is going to be a tough conversation to have and a little bit emotional, and that's okay. Because my job here is to help you go from an emotional state to a logical state by filling in this gap here with data and facts, which we're going to talk about here. And everyone thinks their stuff is better. And not just real estate, everyone thinks their vehicle is better. Everyone thinks they're better at their job than everyone else. Everyone always puts that upon themselves. And the same thing happens in real estate, and the same thing happens to your property when you're thinking about potentially selling it. And I would say, try to separate the emotions from the facts, and we're going to talk about the facts here in a little bit. And one misconception, the next topic is on cosmetics. The next misconception is, I put $20,000 worth in upgrades. Doesn't that mean that I need to add $20,000 on what I want to list my house for? Not necessarily. I understand you spent all this money on better countertops. I understand you spent all this money on better finishes on other things. But, Mr. Seller, you understand that a lot of times when the appraiser comes over, they look at it, but it's not really a big game changer to them, So that's one thing people think is I put all this money into my property, maybe even the landscape, and this something, and they want to use that as, hey, we should put $30,000 on top of what you think it's worth, Mr. Real Estate Agent, because that's how much I spent on this. But that's not always necessarily true. Maybe sometimes it's true, but sometimes it's not. And yeah, I put newer finishes, doesn't always resemble the same value as what you think it is, and all that ties back into emotions, okay? Because I understand you spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears putting all these upgrades into your house, but it doesn't necessarily mean that resembles the price what you think it is. And some people say, the sprinkler system I put in, well, sometimes that doesn't really equate to the value you think it is either. And that's a hard conversation to have, okay? And one of the ways to understand what your real value of potentially your house is looking at the data, and the data comes in the comparables, and show what people are paying for with the location, with the square footage, with the bedrooms, with the bathrooms, and acreage, lot size, all that stuff, and get a real good feel of what the data is showing you, what the people are paying for versus what you think it is, tied back to emotions, okay? And also not only what people are paying for, but also what your competition is on the market right now. Because if you're going to sell your house, you want to be the number one option. Is that not correct? And they'll say, correct, of course, because you want a thing to sell, so you want to be the number one option, okay? And we want to be data driven and not emotional driven, and try to separate the two, the data and the emotions, okay? And even if you do list your price, Mr. Seller, at a higher amount, there's a thing called an appraisal that comes in, okay? And they may think that we're off by, kind of what we've been talking about earlier, we're off by $60,000. It's amazing if you can get someone to go ahead and pay for this, all cash, perfect, amazing. But if someone's financing your property, Mr. Seller, and the appraisal comes in and ruins a lot of things, I'm not only going to feel bad, but also this is the reality of what happens, okay? Because now we're going to have to potentially, depending on the motivation, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but there's a good shot we're going to have to lower down the sales price to meet this appraised value, because that's what the comparables are looking at, and that's what the appraisal gets. And Mr. Seller, I want to build a relationship past a transaction, past real estate, and I don't want to give you all this high expectations, okay, that we're going to get all this money in your pocket and deliver subpar results, because I want to build a relationship with you. I understand there could be, and this is another conversation, I understand that there could be an agent that wants to list your property at the price point that you think it is, even though it's way off, because maybe this person is hungry for business and whatnot. But I'm here to build a relationship, and I need to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And what you need to hear is all the stuff that we're talking about today when it comes from emotions, some cosmetic, maybe upgrades, and comparables. And this is what the data is showing, Mr. Seller. Okay? And yeah, the low appraisal we just talked about, you have to potentially drop it. And I even put on there also, I don't want to build a bad relationship with you, because past real estate, I want to build a lifetime relationship and not have it tarnished because I overpromised, underdelivered. And maybe depending on the motivation for the seller, they could say back, and maybe you're watching this and you're in the same boat. If it sells, it sells. If it doesn't, it doesn't, and that's totally okay. Perfect. That's your motivation for it. You want to sell this thing. And if you want to go on a higher price point and potentially wait for a cash buyer to avoid a potential appraisal issue, or find a buyer that wants to finance it and is willing to close the gap on an appraisal, that's okay. If that's your motivation and you're not really in a big rush, go ahead. That's totally okay. Okay? And another thing too is, if you would overprice this thing and it's not because you think it's worth more than it is, potentially, there could be higher time on the market, okay? And higher price could potentially mean, like I said, higher time on there. And maybe your motivation is okay to sit, like we just previously talked about. If it sells, it sells. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm willing to wait as long as it needs to be, and that's totally okay. But let me ask you, if you're gonna buy a house and you see this thing has been on the market for a very long time, do you think you're gonna put in an offer that meets the seller's price and terms necessarily? No, of course not, because you think you could probably get a good deal, because, well, I guess not always don't understand the situation for the seller, but you see higher time market, everyone else starting to think, what's wrong with this property? Did something show up, or what is the real issue here? And maybe it's overpriced. That could be thinking in buyers' heads, and that only the downstream effect of that could be a buyer putting in a lower offer, and now maybe you're accepting an offer on what we talked about, what your property could potentially be worth. Okay, so it's a very emotional conversation to have, because everyone thinks that their stuff is better. But once you separate the emotion from the data and really look at the comparables and stuff like that, and maybe even deep dive into comparables, like, hey, similar property did sell at the price that you want, but you understand that they're paying $12,000 in concessions to cover the buyer's closing costs and maybe buy down an interest rate for the buyer. So take that with a grain of salt, But there's so many things to talk about, and there's so many emotions in the process of buying and selling real estate. So hopefully you found this video valuable, and yeah, like I said, maybe if you get someone for the price and terms of what you think that your house is worth, amazing. Okay, but I wouldn't want to tarnish a relationship over something I know deep down that I need to tell you that your price is way off. Okay, so thank you guys for watching. Have a good one. Bye.